Hi and welcome. My name is Jesper. This is a demo about the equipment as a service. There is a lot of talks about equipment as a service out there, and for good reasons. Equipment as a service is a great business model that actually opens up a lot of opportunities, but it also comes with a lot of uncertainties. It's a transformation, and for that, a lot of people, of course, are asking, "What's it all about? How do I get started?" and all of this. And for that purpose, we've designed this mock-up to illustrate what it could look like. So let me walk you through this, and hopefully that will give you some ideas about what it is. So in order to illustrate it, we have taken a practical example. So here we're talking about a use case which is called internal transportation. So internal transportation is the task of moving goods from A to B in a warehouse or in a manufacturing site. This is something that you typically see done with forklifts today. But in this use case, we're actually playing that we are an OEM producing AMRs, autonomous mobile robots, that are coming in and revolutionizing the internal transportation tasks out there, going in and automating some of the forklift activities and moving things back and forth. So here we are an OEM that are now coming in and offering our AMRs as a service. So let's start by looking at the solution that we have here. We call it Hitachi as a service. So Hitachi as a service have enabled this OEM to actually establish a company which they call internal transportation as a service, and we will have a look at what it will look for an OEM. But one important thing is that when you offer something as a service, this is very much, and this is one of the key things, this is very much a very tight interaction between the OEM and the end customer. This is also why the Hitachi as a service offering actually opens up visibility and transparency both for the OEM, but also for the end customer, which is really important. And we'll dive into the customer side in just a second. But let's start with the OEM. So if we go and have a look at the OEM piece. So one of the key things when you go in and offer something as a service, it's about you need to know, you need to be in the know. So here you can say we have a fleet of assets. So we have over 1,000 AMRs deployed out there with different customers. We want to know how they are performing, because in an as a service model, we are getting revenue for usage, meaning that the more these AMRs are being utilized, the more revenue we get in. So now that we are offering as a service, we better be on top of it. And this is, of course, where the technologies like IoT and AI and all of this comes in, that will enable us to have an eye on the equipment as they are deployed out there. So what you'll be met with initially here is an operational view. You'll see your assets, you will see something about utilization, and you'll see something about OEE. And for everybody working in manufacturing, they know very much what OEE is about. The key thing with OEE in this, and I think this is relevant for, I think, most industries, is that this is a KPI for availability, performance, and quality. And again, you can say, you offering a service, it's exactly about these things. You need to make sure that your assets, the value that you are creating to the end customer, are performing. It's available. Available means that it can generate revenue that you want, and of course that it deliver the right quality that the end customer expect. So measuring OEE makes perfect sense in this kind of service offering. So what we're illustrating here, and of course this is very much a mock-up example, so this is of course not a solution that is live out there. This is to illustrate a point and illustrate the mindset that you need to have transforming from a traditional OEM, in this case offering AMRs, to a service company, in this case offering internal transportation as a service. So you'll see initially an operating view, an operational view, where you'll see your assets, in this case sorted by the clients, the customers that you have. You can see any kind of incidents that the system have detected, this remote connected solution have detected, and it can be all kind of issues. So in top one here, we have some hardware issues. So we actually have an AMR here that has sensor errors. We can go in and have a look, and we can see that it is a block sensor In this case, it could be that someone is standing in front of it, that is blocking the way, it cannot pass around it, can't find a way to avoid it. So we can actually go in here, send a message to the people on the floor. So the end customer is saying, hey, please go have a look at this. Something is stopping it from operating. And then we do that and notification is off. And one thing that is extremely important with this is that when you go from being a transactional company selling equipment, maybe with some kind of service agreements, and going into being a service company, you need to have a different mindset in terms of how you actually service your customers. You need to talk about customer success. So you need to be proactive. You need to be able to actually identify things better before the end customer does, so you actually can react on it and make sure that your operations is at its best. And this could be an example of that. And you can see another error that is also here is that there is an AMR that has some deteriorated battery capacity. They run on batteries they can wear out. And here, the solution for this is replace the battery. So a notification have already been sent to the service team that they will actually go there and replace the battery and get it up and running again, so it will run completely, which is perfect. But it's not only hardware issues that you'll monitor in this kind of situation. It could also be utilization. Again, utilization is extremely important. So here you have a customer that is actually having a very, very high utilization, which in principle is quite good. But the problem is you're offering a service and the end customer is trusting your service. And with the utilization of 96%, there is a risk that you actually will not be able to deliver on the service level agreements that you've made with them, because the smallest breakdown will actually make it not available, meaning that they are relying a lot on the robot running completely all the time. So maybe in this case, it actually would make sense to add a robot more to the fleet to actually add something there, and you will go in and then have a look at that. And of course, here you can say, well, here we're looking very much on utilization. It could just as well have been on OEE, and we can go in there and look at the different utilizations. Again, we have the one on top that is very high, and of course there is the opposite. You have customers that have a very low utilization, and of course tracking the trend, identifying if there is a change. And this is again where customer success come in. You will then proactively go and talk to the customer and say, what's happening there? Is it COVID that have shut down your factory? Is it the supply chain issues, or is it something not right there? And then you can see if you can come in and do something and mitigate it in some way. It can be you can reduce capacity with the customer, or you don't do anything because they will be up and running next week, or whatever it is. But again, you are being proactive. You are out there talking with the customer and together figuring out how can you create the best value, the most value for it. And of course, again, you can look at the incidents, you can dive into details to really figure out how is it going and what can we do to actually optimize our assets. And of course, we can then dive into the individual customer. We can go into a dedicated customer view, dive in and see, well, how well is it? So if we, again, remember our sensor error, we can go in there. We send a notification to the end customer that they should do something. There is a SLA associated with these kind of errors in the contract that we have made with them. So they need to react within 30 minutes. And they have some time. And then on their side, they've received a notification. They'll go in and look. We can even call them and tell them, because we actually have a live view of where the assets, the AMRs, are around in the factory or the warehouse or whatever the facility is, and we can tell them that it's around here that they are, and they should do something about that. And of course, we can dive in and look at how the capacity is and all of this stuff. We can also go in and add the things that you typically hear about in the whole manufacturing 4.0. So stuff like predictive maintenance and all of this. Again, going in here and saying, well, we utilize those capabilities. We can see that if we look at maintenance, it makes sense that we actually send our maintenance technicians out, or service technicians out in around this time frame, because this seems to be the most optimal place where the asset needs servicing or maintenance. So we make sure not to come too often, and we make sure to come before anything breaks down as well. You could also imagine you have ways of actually looking at spare parts. So maybe you have spare part strategically place it with different customers. But of course, as an OEM, you own the spare parts, you own the assets. you can use them as buffer storages. So here you can go in and look at where are your spare parts. So if you need to do something, maybe it's the battery that we had an issue with. So you can go in and have a look and see where are the batteries in this. Again, the whole idea with this is that you are able to go in, look at the individual customer, you can dive into the details and actually see how can you ensure that they run with an optimal operation and you creating the value that they expect. And of course, thereby you actually are generating the revenue that you do. And now that we are talking about revenue and all this, of course, it's not all about operations. You also need to have an eye on financing in this as well. So the financials. So what is the financials? How is it going? And here we can go in and have a look at the individual customer. We can dive in and see, so how is the customer? Is it a profitable customer? Are we generating the necessary revenue out of this customer? It can be that we have priced it a bit optimistic and there is a lot of risk associated with that and so on and so on. So again, having a capability of being able to dive into the financials, figuring out if it's profitable or not, and taking the right decisions on how to actually manage the customer in that way. And of course, we're also thinking in and saying, well, what about, can we monitor the app? Can you monitor the risk? Can you actually figure out how risky is this customer? Is it has there a lot of seasonalities? Are the utilization going very much up and down, which is not bad for you, and so on and so on. Quite interesting. And of course, this is on the customer view. We can go back and have a look on the global view. So actually seeing this, of course, financial on your total fleet. So of course, running a fleet means that it's okay to have some customers performing not that good right now, if you just have others that kind of compensate. And of course, that's why it's important to get some kind of critical mass in this in these kind of solutions, so you actually can mitigate that risk out there. And a tool like this will then allow you to actually keep an eye on your fleet from a financial point of view. We saw the other one, which is from the operational point of view, to actually see how is it working, how can I manage it. So you can look at what is the total cost of ownership of your asset. When is it time to actually, in this case up here, when is it time to actually recycle it, retire it, add in new pieces of hardware to actually do that. And again, this tool will allow you to dive into the details to actually get a view of how is it performing and actually take the right decisions on that, looking at profitability, revenue, cost of operations, and so on. Another important thing is the pricing calculator. So you can imagine pricing an as a service model is not trivial. So you come from a point where you are selling an asset on a transactional basis, and now suddenly you are charging for usage. And how do you do that? You need to figure out how much will the solution be used, what would the unit be for all of this. And this is, of course, where if you have data and as you collect more and more data, you have the right foundation to actually take decisions. So this is why, of course, there needs to be some kind of pricing calculations where you can go and talk to new customers or when you extend services with existing customers to actually be able to calculate. So what would the price be in an internal transportation case? It could be per meters driven. So how do you actually calculate that? And having some kind of advanced calculator that takes into consideration the whole cost structure of operating this, but also looking at the history to include the risk factors and all of this is quite important. So not trivial. And again, here you need to have the right tooling in place to actually make that happen. So this is a very quick overview of this. One thing that I didn't talk about, which I think is illustrated quite well in the operations view here, if you go and look into the customer. So if you were paying attention on the view over here, you could see that actually there's two kind of assets being illustrated. There is the AMRs, but there's also the forklifts. And the reason for that is, so if you offer internal transportation as a service, you are, in this case, an AMR company, but actually what the end customer wants, they want internal transportation and they don't necessarily care too much what kind of asset it is. So in a warehouse, it will typically be a combination of different vendors, of different types of assets. In this case, it's AMRs and forklifts working together, cooperating, in making an optimal operations of this. And obviously, if you are a company offering something as a service, you actually can start going out and offering the value of optimizing internal transportation as a service. That will require that you actually get information about the forklifts. So you can say, here we're just illustrating it with a small picture, but you can imagine that you actually could do recommendations. You could get data from the forklift about where they are. You could get data from if it's a warehouse, from your WMS system or from the MES system, to actually help in optimizing internal transportation. Because the idea is, of course, that you being a AMR company that are all about internal transportation, you're the experts. So of course you have a lot of knowledge to actually go out there and support the organizations in making the optimal operations. And of course that will give you a relation to your customer that is worthwhile, that is stickiness, and you can add all kind of value adding services and offerings on top of that going forward. So again, it's a change of mindset. It's a change of mindset saying that I'm not just a hardware vendor offering AMRs. I'm actually a solution provider providing the optimum internal transportation as a service. And that opens huge opportunities. It's of course very much driven by digital. It's very much driven by you being a digital company, utilizing your asset the optimum, but also acknowledging that you are not alone in this. You need to cooperate, and then you embrace that. Meaning you can build ecosystems, you can build on competition, so working closely with competitors, because that's actually the way that you can optimize it for the end customer. New opportunities, creativity can come in there. So that's seen from the OEM point of view. So actually, let's go and look at the end customer. So this is the customer that we had the sensor error with. So we go in and look there. So this will be the view for the end customer. Here you would have the floor manager, the fleet manager that will, on their side, maintenance manager, engineering manager, whatever it will be. They will have access to it. You can see here the sensor we saw earlier. They have an unresolved. The responsibility is with the end customer, and they have this SLA limit of 20 minutes. They could go in up and say, yes, we checked it. Now everything is good. It was a pallet being put in front of it, and it couldn't go, and done. You can go in, you can see the deteriorated battery, and here you can say, well, we know there's something wrong. That's great. We want to have that transparency because we are relying on an OEM offering this to us as a service. So this is great. And we can see here that the OEM have acknowledged this error, and they have actually they have called for a service technician that will be with us within the next 2 days. So again, we feel that it's being registered, that there's something wrong, and actions are being taken to this that helps us optimize it. We feel comfortable, we feel safe with this OEM. But not only that, we've integrated it with the forklifts. So seen from an end customer view, they can see the fleet of internal transportation assets. And here you can say we have a battery-driven forklift that has a battery error. So in this case, you can say you can't send it to the OEM and expect them to fix it because it's not their asset. But you have the transparency. You have a single dashboard for actually going in and looking at your assets, where you can optimize them, where you can actually manage them the best way possible. Again, it gives you a view of actually doing that. And you can again go in and have a look at utilization, as we saw from the OEM. And for an end customer, this is important because this could have an impact on your price. And you can say, in this case here with mobile robots, it's an asset that you can add a robot, you can remove a robot fairly simple. That may not be the case for any kind of assets that you have out there. But in this case, you can, meaning you can have flexibility in this kind of service. So you may, in this case here, we have the company here, they have a fleet of 16 robots at the minute. But maybe at some times they maybe only have 14 because they have seasonalities. Maybe they have 18 at peak periods. And then you can say the OEM, the service provider, could go in actually and adjust the capacity as needed as we go through this. And here the idea, and we have illustrated it with a forecast, here the idea would be if the MES system or the WMS system data are being fed into this solution, you have forecasting data. So you would actually be able to help the end customer forecast when are we going to need higher capacity, or when do we have lower capacity? And then that will have an impact on, they could have an impact on the price in both directions. So every time you do a shift in either direction, there is a slight increase for, in this case, a month. And then we go down and have some discounts, maybe because the utilization is at a high level and so on. So the pricing models can be quite complicated. And again, you want to have a solution to make sure that you as an end customer can actually optimize that. And of course, that brings us to the financing slide. So when you get something as a service, it's flexible payments, which is what you want. But the problem here is that how do you figure out what you budget for? It's an operating expense suddenly, but you want to make sure that you know what is your monthly cost. And since it's flexible, it can vary. So again, having a way of actually being able to go in and say, well, how much cost have I actually gathered for this month? And based on current consumption, what would the cost be for the end of the month? What kind of pricing package am I at the minute? And again, that could be depending on what kind of utilization do I have, how many robots do I have, and so on. So it makes sense that you as a service provider would go in and say, well, if customers are utilizing my assets at a high level, let's say at above 80%, you'll give them a discount. So you kind of incentivize them for using the asset the most, because then you as a service provider actually get the robots running and generating revenue. So you kind of incentivizes that. This is also what we try to illustrate with these kind of insights and recommendations. Here in the middle, you can see a tip saying, hey, dear customer, if you go and increase your AMR emissions with 6%, you actually go into the tier of getting a 10% discount and so on. It can also be, it illustrates issues and so on. So again, using the digitization, using data, using predictions and so on to actually help optimize the fleet and do something. There could also be a view of costs, but actually taking in costs not only from the AMRs, but also from the forklift. So actually giving you a cost picture of your full internal transportation task to actually help you illustrate. So with this kind of service, what kind of reductions am I looking into? What kind of savings have I achieved by having this solution? And typically it's savings that we talk about when we talk about internal transportation, but other use cases, other types of asset classes, it wouldn't necessarily be savings. It could be increased throughput or whatever it would be. But that's of course very dependent on the solution. So this was a way of actually giving you an insight, and I hope that came clear, that transforming into equipment as a service is about going to, it's a digital business model, so you need to be able to digitize your assets. As you have IoT'd your assets and get the data in, you can use that, of course, to get the insights into how your assets are performing. But you can actually take it the level up further, offer usage-based business model. You can offer comprehensive value-generating services that are more than just your asset itself, that is actually going in and helping the end customer optimize their operations based on the expertise that you actually have in your company. So I hope that was quite enlightening. If you want to learn more, please reach out, and thank you for listening.